Welcome, everyone. This election season, the North Pacific's Ministry of Radio is sponsoring a series of voice chat and text based town halls for each candidate. We hope this event is informative and we encourage you to participate by asking questions in the chat. And now, let's get started. Welcome, Nimarya.
Hi.
Could you give us a brief history of on yourself within the region and a history of the positions you've held within the region?
Well, it's been over a year since I joined the North Pacific. I got started with the executive staff pretty quickly because I actually met Bluey, and he happened to be the Minister of Home Affairs at the time. And I knew I wanted to get involved somehow, but I didn't have any idea how or where. So I knew one person in that ministry who happened to be the minister, and that was good enough for me. So I put in my application for home affairs, and then the rest is kind of history because I ended up being made deputy like the same term that I joined home affairs, and then the term after that I became minister of home affairs, and then I served as minister of home affairs for a second term, and then this term, I became Minister of Defense because at some point in all of that, I had joined the NPA and risen in the ranks from private to lieutenant to captain.
Why did you decide to run for delegate?
Well, basically, MCM came knocking on my door. He was like, "Hey, you want to?" He didn't actually say that, but he told me that he felt like the region was in a pretty good spot, and he didn't really want to run for another term, and so I was like, "Well, I don't really. I have a lot of ideas that I would like to see become reality. Like, I really think, you know, sometimes it takes a focus on smaller things to gradually create a big change, and I felt like if given the chance, I think I could make significant progress in our executive staff this term.
Can you give us a brief summary of the core points of your campaign?
Uh, well, I don't have it up with me right now, but um, basically, the general focus for most ministries is on recruitment and retention. Um, just the first step is like getting people to apply, and then the next is getting them to stay, and then after that you need to focus on how can they succeed, because if you get like a dozen applicants but you don't train any of them, you don't tell any of them, well, how do you get started, where do you go from here, they're going to lose interest and drift away or get frustrated. And that was actually something I encountered when I joined home affairs, because when I joined, there wasn't really, you were kinda left to your own devices, and I remember at one point, I actually DM'd MCM, who was the delegate at the time, just asking him, "How do you send rows?" Because no one had ever taught me, and I was just, like, I had a lot of questions and no one was really answering them. So, when I ended up becoming Minister of Home Affairs, I, dedicated quite a bit of my time to making sure that anyone who joined after me wouldn't have that same struggle. Like, they would have a guide, they would have a system that would work for them. And that's something that I applied to the NPA when I became Minister of Defense later. And it's something I would like to see applied in a more broad sense to the executive staff as a whole if I were to become delegate.
How quickly do you believe you can execute on your campaign goals?
Um, I believe if I kept a decent schedule, I could have quite a few of them done by the midterm. Like, some of them I designed, like for communications, for example, I mentioned the possibility of bringing in like an aspect of creative writing, designed more almost as an advertisement for the ministry itself to try and entice people who are skilled as writers but might not necessarily be interested in strictly journalistic writing. And, like, my goal to just try test the waters with that and see if it's feasible would be to create one publication that's focused on creative writing and art, and to try and aim and get that out towards the end of the term so we could be working on it all throughout the term, because I'm aware that in the past when we've done creative writing or art type submission events, there wasn't as much turnout as we would have liked. So my hope is that by focusing on it throughout the 4 months, we can get a really good finished product in the end, as opposed to if we rushed it in like a month or something. But I would say the majority of the things that I have listed on my platform are things that I could realistically see get done.
Several executive ministries suffer from high turnover or a shortage of staff. How would you work with your ministers to build up a core staff that is capable of meeting the government's needs?
I feel like I've already mentioned that a bit. Um, well, I would be working with Home Affairs significantly. Um, I want the focus every week to be on a ministry that needs staff. I really would like to invest not only in sending out rows, but in more like game side recruitment, like on the R&B, with the game side advocates, and to just really longer term look into different any little thing that could bring in publicity, get a few people interested in applying, and then also, like I mentioned, in order to keep those people, like both with the NPA, communications, and I probably would look into this in the other ministries as well, and creating like a new staffers guide of some kind, just so people have direction when they join.
How will you continue or change the executive staff moving forward from McMasterdonia's delegacy?
Do you mean like what would I change structurally, or like who would I have as ministers? Like, what do you mean by that?
Structurally, more or less.
Structure.
Ministers is questions that we can primarily just avoid because there may not be fully fleshed out at the idea.
I get you. I would probably keep it more or less the same. I like the system we have going. Um, I don't believe I will be using a chief of staff just because I personally, like, I'm sure they've been useful and they've done good work, but I personally haven't seen that much of an effect from having one. Um, so I'm unlikely to have a chief of staff. I would just focus on getting the best cabinet I could and working collaboratively with them. Um, Although that's subject to change. If at some point I feel like it would be best and wisest to get some extra help with managing the executive, then I would look into potentially getting a chief of staff. Hello?
Right. I'm just reloading the next question. No, I'm
Okay.
not gone, Casto. Um, the delicacy can come with a lot of stress and difficult decisions. How would you rate your own confidence out of a scale of 1 to 10?
Probably like a 7. Like, maybe I wouldn't say I'm overconfident, because like sometimes I'm like, "Hey, am I crazy? Is this a good idea?" Cuz like I can also get like caught up in like, "Ooh, I have this really new idea. I want to go try it out." But usually I try to like talk to at least one other person like, "Hey, is this actually a good idea?" before I like go all out with it. Um but I would say, especially working as Minister of Defense, I had to get a thick skin and fast. And I also had to learn to recognize when, I have done good work. I had to learn when to recognize that this is the decision that I feel is the best choice. And even if someone doesn't necessarily agree with that, it's my call and this is what we're going to do. Not to be like arrogant and never listen to what people have to tell you or what their advice is, but to learn how to balance that, to not just be led around all the time, but to practice your own judgment.
How, what will your administration do to improve life for each of our regional communities, from the executive staff to the North Pacific Army, and from our role players to our R&Bers?
Um, Lots of different ways of bringing the communities together. Uh, just speaking very broadly. Like with the executive staff, the individual ministries would have potentially little events or games or whatever I can think of and collaborate with the ministers to like really make the ministries someplace worthwhile to be. With the MPA, I mentioned in my platform how I have this idea for an MPA festival that would just be focused on really promoting military gameplay and our regional military. Um, let's see. With RP, I did have a few ideas. Like, I'm not involved in that community as much, and so I would probably heavily rely upon the advice of those who are to do anything. But of course, I would be open to, involving them in whatever they would like with potentially with radio or with communications. Like the idea I had to publish make a publication dedicated towards writing, creative writing, and art. I had the idea of potentially like letting RP snippets or bits or flags or coat of arms or whatever be submitted to that.
Is one thing that you see as your advantage over your candidate, Robespierre?
Primarily that I'm coming into this having been on the executive council for a year straight. I'm very familiar. Like I've talked with all of the ministers with Macedonia. I've just served a long time, and I'm very familiar with the state of the different ministries, of the staff, of what our capabilities are, what the issues have been time and again. And so I feel like I would be in a good place to choose how to begin tackling those.
What is one flaw that you see as the most major flaw from McMasterdonia's delegacy from the past 4 months?
I think the delegacy started out very strongly, particularly during the South Pacific, the issues with the South Pacific, and the quorum raids we performed. Um, I think probably the greatest weakness would be that towards the end of the term, I believe real life was just not allowing for him to be as active or engaged as he would have liked to have been, which is sad because, he could have probably, um, there would have maybe been a few things that we could have done that we didn't do. But overall, I would say, considering where we began at the start of this term and where we are now, there's been significant improvement. So um, even though activity wasn't where we would have liked to seen it in those last few weeks, I'm still pretty satisfied with how we done this term.
On the topic of quorum rating, what do you think that we should continue doing quorum rating as we had one last term under McMasterdonia's delegacy? Do you think that we should have quorum rating?
I think quorum rating should be used very sparingly. This might not be a popular opinion for someone in the NPA, but I've always viewed it as a last resort. It should only be used in situations like where you're doing a fash bash or you've tried it's integral to the region's interest and the alternatives aren't good and you've tried sending out, you know, telegrams and you've tried talking to people. So I would never condone a quorum raid just for kicks and giggles, or for something where the alternative of letting it get to vote wouldn't be all that bad. With the quorum rates we did earlier this term, uh, we didn't want the proposal to even reach the floor because the mere act of it reaching the floor and going to vote and gaining that attention would have done harm because it would have been press for CCD that we did not want them to have. So that was why we made the call to do the quorum raid, was because we couldn't just let it get to vote.
Mhm. Because of the quorum raids of McMaster Delegacy, the South Pacific, a longtime ally of the North Pacific, has cut off diplomatic relations with us. How would you seek to restore relations between the two Pacifics?
I would be open to having conversations with South Pacific leadership. Um, I don't know. We would probably avoid working with them again until after we've worked something out or we've reached an understanding um, in some manner of communication. Um, it's more or less just a matter of letting time pass and for letting the matter rest.
Uh, What is your leadership style like?
Oh, uh, I would say pretty engaged. I like to lead by example. Like I don't necessarily like to like delegate work that I wouldn't be willing to do myself. And so even though I do have to work with other people to accomplish what needs to be done, because no person can do all of it and you're going to drive yourself crazy if you try to do everything yourself. Um, I've always been like, don't ask someone to do something that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. And so, like, with home affairs, when I was leading as minister there, like, I was always doing the rows myself, sending out mentorship messages myself. And then with the NPA, it's like, okay, I'm not going to ask my soldiers to show up for this late major update if I'm not willing to do that myself, if I'm not willing to put in the work and lead. So, I believe that approach has served me well. Do you have any more questions?
No, I'm primarily seeing if does anyone in the audience have questions because if there are not, we can always end it here, even though it's very short. So,
Short and sweet. I mean, I'm a bit nervous, so I feel like I've rambled quite a bit more than I would normally, but I don't mind to answer any questions as best I can.
yes, yes, Wes. Well, I mean, it was always audience time. You could have just asked questions when I was saying questions, and I would have been completely fine. Not like there's a set time for audience questions. It's completely fine.
Oh,
It's
if I was stuck on an island. Absolutely, Bluey. And the reason why I say this is because we've done this before in Minecraft. It it's I don't we've literally been like, we've had a lot of good times before playing Minecraft, and we've literally been stuck on an island before. He rode off in a boat and found land, and I tried to follow him and got lost, and so I had to drown myself and spawn back on the island so he could go back to the island with the boat and rescue me. It was all good fun. If the NPA had a theme, I would joke about how the NPA has the pink theme, but that was just because I was a big fan of pink. Um, I don't really know if we've ever had like a theme like pirates or anything. Um, I've always we I've always saw the NPA as kind of like a a community within a community. It's like my home within the North Pacific. And so I guess if there was any theme, um it would be just that of, like, friends goofing off. I don't know if that's a theme. We should get a theme, though. I would like one. Although my idea to have our theme be spiders was shot down pretty hard, and I'm sad about that. Yes, that's exactly it. That's our theme. Oh, no, not really. Um, that's like it's the NPA matches the North Pacific in that we aren't really big on having a theme. We just are what we are, but we're so good at whatever it is we do. It's like no one it doesn't really matter because like we don't need the theme gimmick, you know? You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Um will I have any spiders in my cabinet? Maybe. People tend to be scared of spiders, so I usually keep my love for tarantulas to myself, sadly. No, I will not, sadly. Although I probably will bother you and the op channels significantly. I'll probably talk during radio silence. That's tradition.
Mm, now, and by the way, Casto, you're gonna have a lot of editing on your hands.
Did I ramble that much?
No, no, you didn't ramble at all. It's primarily just the spot of where I was doing. Yes, of course you are. Recording and editing. It's all one umbrella cabinet for the all. No, Casto, don't leave. I'll, I'll make you do light editing. It's basically just cutting out the one long pause I have.
Okay. So no
And
more questions, just a bunch of okay. I mean, all right.
so I'll just go with the ending now. All right, everyone, thanks for coming. I hope this town hall answered some of your questions about Nimarya's campaign and will help prepare you for the election to come. With that, goodbye.
Bye. Thank you for having me.